Hello and welcome to this FPL Game Week 26 team selection video with me, Holly Shand. I am seriously considering activating the wildcard this week. There is a lot to unpack on potential wildcard drafts, why to play it, strategies going forward as well. Let's get into it. As I mentioned at the top then, I haven't activated my wildcard yet, but I am pretty sure that I'm going to do it. It's been an interesting week already. I'm recording this video on Wednesday morning. We now know that Fulham and Liverpool will have a blank in Game Week 28, but there's been a surprise addition to the schedule. Leicester lost in their FA Cup 5th round, which means that Brentford and Leicester now have a fixture in blank Game Week 28, and that's particularly interesting for Brentford assets because they now double in 27, blank in 28 and double in 29, and I'm really seriously underprepared for this. As it stands, I haven't got any Brentford players in my team, I haven't got any Brighton players in my team for their double game week. Leicester's Danny Ward is the only option in there as well, and looking at my team for that blank Game Week 28, I've only got 7 players in there at the moment. That includes Eddie Nketiah, who could easily lose his place soon. We've already seen him rested. Gabriel Jesus is back in training, so he's an issue that needs dealing with. And I've also got Kepa in there, who I'm not that keen on now that we've seen Chelsea's dip in form. So I think there's a perfect storm brewing. And even though, you know, those chips could be powerful down the line, right now, I feel like my team really needs it. I've also got a couple of other issues in my squad. Riyad Mahrez has not been a great FPL asset since the return of Champions League. Kyle Walker as well is causing me a little bit of a headache because he's not a consistent starter. City's fixtures aren't that great either, so I'd be happy to move him on as well. If we look at the latest schedule then from Ben Crellin, there is some important teams to look at. Obviously we've mentioned Brentford, who have 2 double game weeks coming up, and they also don't blank in Game Week 32, which is an important one to note. We've also got Brighton with 2 doubles in the not so distant future as well, and good fixtures among that as well. I'm also looking at my Newcastle United assets. I don't really want to play them away at Manchester City this week, so if I play the wildcard this week, it allows me to potentially deal with that problem as well. We've got Liverpool facing Manchester United. I've got Gakpo in my squad at the moment. Not really keen on playing him in this fixture either. So it allows us to bring on board Brentford and Brighton assets that have got really good fixtures this week and avoid having to play those different players in those more challenging fixtures. If we just look at the schedule then, we've got a double game week in 27, we've got a blank in Game Week 28, a double game week 29, a blank 32, and then a double in Game Week 34. We're also expecting a double in Game Week 37 as well. So they're going to be the key game weeks to be looking at playing wildcards, free hit chips and bench boost. And there's a couple of strategies that I've put together for that. The strategy that I think I'm going to be moving on to now is wildcard in Game Week 26. I don't feel like we need to free hit now in Game Week 28 because of the fact that Brentford players have got that utility. They don't blank in that game week. You know, Brentford players, Arsenal players, Newcastle United, they're going to be the ones that see us through that game week. It may be a game week that we don't choose to play 11 players anyway, which is absolutely fine. And I did put a little short list together on Twitter last night on how to approach that one, so feel free to give me a follow over there as well at Holly Shand. But that's going to be my strategy, and then I think I'll bench boost in Game Week 29 and then free hit either in the blank Game Week 32 or in the doubles in Game Week 34 or 37. Now, incidentally, we will find out what blank Game Week 32 looks like after tonight's FA Cup fixtures. So that's kind of the only thing we need confirming now. There is Southampton and Spurs are still looking whether they blank or not in Game Week 28, but the odds are fairly set in their favour. The other strategy, though, if you feel like you've got quite a few, you're on the optimal Arsenal triple up, you've got some Brentford and Brighton players already, you're not holding a lot of Liverpool players, then it could work to use your free transfers through this period and then looking at wildcarding maybe after the international break in Game Week 29 or saving it to Game Week 33 as well, depending on what that blank Game Week 32 looks like, and then free hit and or bench boost in Game Week 34 and then free hit in 32 or 37. Now, that blank Game Week 32 is clashes with the FA Cup semi-final, so we could have up to 4 fixtures off, but it's really difficult to say which clubs will be involved before having tonight's information. which is why I haven't activated my wildcard yet. But we do know that Villa, Brentford, Everton, Palace, Leicester, Liverpool, Forest and Wolves do all have a fixture in that week. So that's going to be fairly important in there as well with that strategy. So it's something that we need to review before really locking in our wildcard squads if that's the strategy that we're going for. I have to be honest though, there are a few problems facing game week 26 wildcarders, and probably top of that list is Brentford's Ivan Toney. Now, obviously Brentford have got the most appealing fixtures. They've got a nice fixture in 26, double in 27, then a fixture in the blank 28, double in 29 as well, and have a fixture in 32. Now, the problem with Toney, there's two problems. The first one is that he's on 8 yellow cards, and once he reaches 10 yellow cards, he will serve a 2-game suspension. So should he get booked against Fulham and Everton, for example, he would then miss the Southampton game in double game week 27. Furthermore, if he was to get those 2 bookings before game week 28, then he'd miss that Leicester game. So it is a problem that is probably going to come to fruition at some point in the near future. The other thing is those FA charges. He's pleaded guilty to some of those betting charges. He's also contesting some of them. But given what's happened in the past, we are under the assumption that when those charges are dealt with, he will face a period of suspension where he isn't allowed to play football. Now, I can't speculate on what that will be or how long that will be, but we could see Toney not being an option at some point not out of nowhere, but sort of out of the blue of when it's going to land. So we kind of need to be a bit flexible. That's why I've said if you're not on a wild card this week, I wouldn't buy Toney this week. I'd give yourself an extra week. But on a wild card, I think you have to go for him, but just have a plan to move him on. There's other problems as well. We've got Leicester have suddenly become really good options because they've got a fixture in blank game week 28. They play Brentford away, and then in double game week 29 they've got Crystal Palace and Aston Villa, and then they play Wolves in blank game week 32. James Maddison is the standout player in their squad in terms of his attacking output, but he is currently yellow flagged with an injury, missed the FA Cup in midweek. We saw how poor Leicester looked without him. So that's another problem for wildcarders who are maybe looking at Maddison as a potential option. Then we've got Brighton, and we saw Estupiñán and March were not in the squad for their FA Cup game on Tuesday evening. I feel like Estupiñán is more of he kind of just got rested for the cup. The issue with Solly March could be a bit more of a problem. So that's something that we need information from in De Zerbi's press conference that should come on Friday on his availability. But, you know, having that unavailability of those Brighton players is going to cause us some headaches as well. And it's something we need to be aware of. It is the downside for wildcarding this week. But I still think there's enough upside rather than waiting for game week 27 with more information, because it allows you to get Brentford and Brighton in for their good fixtures and avoid you having to play too many players from City, Newcastle United, Manchester United and Liverpool, who face off against each other this weekend. Turning our attentions then to Brentford assets, I think on a wild card you have to pick Toney, hope for the best, but just be aware that you may have to deal with a problem down the line. Beyond him, obviously if Toney does get suspended on either issue, then you could move him to Mbomo at some point as well. He's another option in the frame, but I don't think you can pick him while Toney's still available. But beyond that, I feel like you're probably going to be doubling up on defensive assets. Now, David Raya is the top performing goalkeeper in the game this season. We've also got Ben Mee, who has scored more goals than any other defender. And we also see that Rico Henry has got plenty of attacking output as well. So picking two of those three will make good sense. Now, I think whether you pick Raya or not also depends on what you're planning on doing with that goalkeeper slot. Now, one other strategy I'm looking at is towards Brighton assets. I could pick Sanchez as my goalkeeper, as one of my two goalkeepers, because we know that Brighton have got plenty of double game weeks coming up. He's not as good as Raya, but we kind of see that goalkeeper spot as a bit of a dead spot. And if you can hold Sanchez in that spot, maybe rotate him with Leicester's Danny Ward, for example, then it doesn't matter about the blanks in 28 or 32, which Brighton could well have, because you've still got a a goalkeeper available for those if you're rotating with Ward. And you can also look to really take advantage of those other couple of double game weeks that Brighton should have towards the end of the season. In terms of other options, I think if you were to go with Sanchez, then that takes the heat out of needing to know for Stupinan's fitness. But we'll see what De Zerbi comes up with at the end of the week. I think Mitoma's a lock in our Brighton attackers. I think it's fine to double up on the Brighton attack. I think if I was doubling up, Solly March would be the way to go for me if we know that he's definitely fit, because he's been fantastic in his new role under De Zerbi. But we've also seen Alexis Mac Allister with a new role in recent games, playing a number 10, but we did see him back in a more defensive midfield role in the FA Cup on Tuesday evening. But he does have the allure of penalties as well. So it's a tricky one to weigh up. But if March is out, obviously you could carry him on your bench in game week 26 if it's only a short-term thing. But Mac Allister could provide an opening there. I've mentioned Leicester assets in there as well because of their appeal with having fixtures in the blanks and a double in game week 29. It all hinges on Maddison though. If Maddison is not available, then it weakens Leicester as a whole. But if he is available, you probably want him in your squad. Iheanacho is also a contender here, but I feel like midfield spots at the moment are a little bit easier for accommodating players than forward spots. That's just my personal thinking on that one, and I will discuss forwards in a bit more detail in a moment. But I do think that Danny Ward is still a good option as well because he's got fixtures in those two blanks. It just depends whether you really fancy him on a bench boost, because we do also need to bear in mind that there's some other goalkeepers that potentially have more upside that could be worth playing in those weeks. But we really need to get blank game week 32 confirmed before we can explore those other options. And we need to bear in mind as well that budget shouldn't be a massive issue for wildcarders. I've seen a lot of wildcard drafts already that have got a lot of funds in the bank. So you could potentially spend a bit more on that second goalkeeper spot. My current goalkeeper is Kepa, and he's been fantastic for me in recent weeks, but Chelsea have seen a dip of form in the last couple of games. There's speculation over Graham Potter's future, and the thing that I don't like is Thiago Silva has now picked up an injury which should see him out for 6 weeks, which seriously weakens Chelsea's defence. Badia Shiel was looking like a good option as well. Reece James could still be a contender, and Ben Chilwell, to be fair, on the other fullback slot, because they provide massive of potential for attacking returns relative to most defenders. João Felix as well could be an option in our attack. I don't think Chelsea midfielders are too great at the moment because there's too much rotation, but Felix should be a consistent starter. But as I said again, a lot of demand on our forward lines at the moment. Speaking of our forward lines then, at the moment I've got Erling Haaland and Harry Kane, and I'm not really wanting to switch away from them at the moment. I have seen some managers toying with the idea of selling Haaland because he blanks in 28. He's got a tough fixture this week against Newcastle, and in the double game week 29 where we could be bench boosting, I think he's got Liverpool at home, which some managers are perceiving as a difficult fixture. But take a step back from that situation and look at how poor Liverpool's defending has been and the fact it's a home game. I don't think that's a bad fixture. I do not think it's an option to sell Haaland, and especially because we'll have had so much value tied up in him as well. There's also a temptation to sell Kane, but I think Harry Kane is a really good option for 26 and 27 when he plays Wolves and Nottingham Forest. And I am going to put up a captaincy planner in a moment which may convince you to keep hold of Kane. Now, Aston Villa's Ollie Watkins is obviously a good option as well. In my wildcard team, he's kind of fighting with Tony for that third forward spot. But if the Tony train derails, Watkins is probably the ready-made replacement that we're looking for. He is on a good scoring run. It's got to end at some point. But I could see me, given external factors, bringing in Watkins either in 28 or 29, potentially in the place of Kane, potentially Tony if he does derail, as I mentioned already. As I've mentioned already then, Haaland and Kane are two really important fantasy assets that I see myself holding long term. I'm including Marcus Rashford in there, who's another player who blanks in game week 28, but he is an easier hold because he does double in game week 29. But we need to be mindful of the single game week players that we're likely to also own for that double game week 29. There is a few of them in there. We've also got to think of our Arsenal assets that have just a single game week in double game week 29, but it is against Leeds at home. But I wanted to look at the captaincy calendar because I think the planner will really help us in honing in on which players we're interested in owning in the short term and the long term as well. Because for me, in game week 26, there's two key contenders, and that is Saka and Kane. Double game week 27 is a little bit tougher in terms of captaincy. Do you go with Ivan Toney? Depends on this suspension thing. Do you go with a Brighton asset like Matoma? You've still got Kane against Nottingham Forest at home as an option, and Saka against Fulham away, as well as Haaland against Crystal Palace away. It's basically going to be a bit of a nightmare. I could probably see myself going Rashford against Southampton at home as well. Double game week 27 captaincy is going to cause us headaches. We get to game week 28, which is the blank game week. It's probably going to be an Arsenal player that we do the armband on for Crystal Palace at home, probably Saka. And then double game week 29, for me, there's a few options in there. I think Marcus Rashford will probably provide us with the most safety in terms of captaincy. But there are other options as well. But it's good to just have a little bit of an idea of how you plan to tackle the captaincy in the next few weeks, because that might allow you to make a better decision on which players to own and which ones to avoid during this period. But let's get into my wildcard team selection for game week 26. So in goal, I've gone for Brighton's Robert Sanchez to really maximise Brighton's doubles over the remainder of the season. It saves me having to pick a Estupiñán, who is flagged, and Danny Ward is on my bench to cover me in the blanks that are coming up. In defence, I've chosen to double up on the Brighton defence with me and Henry, who carry plenty of upside for attacking threat. I've also got Arsenal's Gabriel in there as well. I think he's probably the best option of their back line, and regrettably I'm probably going to have to bench Newcastle United's Kieran Trippier for the away trip to the Etihad. I've also gone with Fabian Schär in there as well, because I like doubling up on the Newcastle United defence that still remain very consistent, and I'm expecting to see an uptake in form in them in recent games. In midfield, I'm going to double up on the Brighton attackers with Matoma and March as things stand, but it does depend on his injury status. I'm also doubling up on Arsenal midfielders. This will be the first time all season I've owned Odegaard and Saka. Hopefully they are going to be the ones in the points for the upcoming game weeks. And Marcus Rashford obviously keeps his place in my side. I think this week I'm probably going to bench March if there's those injury issues do come to fruition still, but it is a bit of a tricky benching dilemma this week. But we need a strong 15 with a view to playing the bench boost in a few weeks. It is going to be a 3-4-3 formation most weeks, and up front this week we've got Erling Haaland, Harry Kane, and I am taking the punt on Ivan Toney. Hopefully he doesn't get banned too soon and is a good FPL asset for us for the coming weeks. This draft has got 2.2 million in the bank, so there's lots of flexibility in there, and as things stand I feel fairly well set for the upcoming doubles and blanks. I've got 6 players that double in game week 27 from Brighton and Brentford. Then looking to blank game week 28, I've got quite a few players here. I've got 3 from Arsenal, I've got 2 from Newcastle, 3 from Brentford. I've also got Danny Ward in there. So that takes me up to 9 players. And I am looking at potentially getting in a Watkins or a Maddison for that week as well, which will set me up nicely as well for the double in game week 29, where I plan to bench boost. I am likely to have 3 Arsenal players for that, a single game week players with Leeds at home. Haaland and Kane will probably stay in there as well, but 10 doublers and then 5 single game week players that are really, really premium. I think that could leave me well set. I do still have the captaincy to lock in for game week 26 as well. My key contenders are Saka at home to Bournemouth and Kane away at Wolves. I think given the home game, I am going to go with Saka, but it is a difficult decision, not an easy one for FPL managers this week, with lots of options in the frame. This is probably the longest video I've ever done, but thank you for getting to this stage with me. I will be confirming my final wildcard team on my live stream, which comes on Friday at 1 o'clock, along with the managers' press conferences. The link is in the description, so make sure you join me for that one. Any dilemmas, I do try and answer your questions within 24 hours of the video going live, so look out for that as well. And good luck for FPL Game Week 26.